How are you guys doing?
Rachel, you have to edit out this part where I do all of my hair fussing and fixing.
It's the first part. It's essential.
Yeah, I can't put that in at the end as an outtake.
Absolutely, you can. That would actually be hilarious. It takes Marce 25 minutes to get her hair ready.
In a world of store-bought items and a world that seems to never slow down, we make with our hands and tools. Here at Woolen Spinning Radio, we take a moment to breathe, to chat, to reflect. As the world continues in a whirlwind around us, we sit quietly at our spinning wheels with our knitting needles or on our looms. The gentle motion of twisting a spindle, watching it dropping slowly to the ground, or the click-clack of needles tapping against each other as we turn a heel, brings solace and comfort. We make with our hands because we love the process and value our handmade items. While they are never perfect, our yarns might be gently thick and thin or just plain over twisted. In this place, we discuss what it means to be a maker, to use our hands. Join us as I chat with others in our community about these ideas, challenges, and rewards. Thank you for your time spent here in this place. You are always welcome.
So I wondered if maybe where we could start is just you guys introducing yourselves and who you are and where we can find you, and then we can kind of get into all of the alongs that you guys are doing this year and the things that people need to know about basically, and where they can go to find all the things. But I thought we could just start with, like, who are you all wonderful people? These wonderful fiber lovely women from around the world. I don't know who wants to start. Mina, do you want to jump off?
Sure. I thought it might be easier if you tell us who you want to go in what order, so we don't end up talking over each other. But yeah, no, I can start.
Yeah, tell us who you are. Give us a good intro of the synopsis of Mina.
Oh, good grief. Okay. Hi, welcome. I say welcome. That's my start for when I start my podcast. It's hi, welcome.
Yeah.
Not my channel. Not my podcast. Sorry.
You do you.
Throw that in the bloopers as well.
It's okay to welcome other people to
welcome to this place,
episode.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. Hi, my name is Mina. You can find me online as Knitting Expat. That's how I'm known on the interwebs. I have a podcast on YouTube, which is the Knitting Expat podcast. I'm on Instagram as Knitting Expat, and I sell knitting patterns. Why can't I form words? On Ravelry as Knitting Expat Designs. I also have a PayHip store for those who can't access Ravelry, and I'm slowly migrating all my patterns over to PayHip as well, so they'll be available in both places. Those are the main places. I think those are the key places that you can find me online: Instagram, Ravelry, YouTube, and PayHip. I also have an Etsy shop, which is Mina Makes, and that has a variety of different other things that I sell, so that's why it's got a different name to it. But yeah, I've been knitting for coming up to how many years now? 7 years. This March will be 7 years. And I've been spinning. I learned to spin at the end of 2018, so technically a little over 2 years, but I really didn't spin much at all last year, so kind of getting back into the groove of things this year. Lockdown kind of really killed my spinning mojo, as it were. It was one of the first thing that got put aside when everything happened last year, but yeah, slowly getting back to it now. And yeah, don't know what else do you want to know?
What brought you to spinning?
What brought me to spinning? I was always fascinated with the idea of spinning, and I always wanted to learn how to spin, but I know myself, and I'm not the most patient person in the world, and I don't. I'm also known. People know me as being a fairly fast knitter, and I am a fast knitter. I don't shy away from that. I embrace that that sort of distinction, I guess. But it's mainly because I don't like things hanging around for too long. I don't like projects taking too long. I'm a fairly somewhat monogamous-ish knitter as well, whereas I focus on a couple of projects at a time. Maximum 3 is my comfort zone, because I'll have a sock, maybe a sweater, and then something else as well, kind of a variety of different things. But I'm not that person who'll have 20 whips stashed away in a closet that they ignore. Like, that's just not how I work. That stresses me out. If I had that, I wouldn't be able to focus on anything else until that was all sorted. Like, that's just, I need to know what I'm working on is going to be finished. And so because of that, I also, and like I said, I don't like things taking a long time. So knowing myself and knowing that, I knew I was never going to learn to spin on a spindle, or at least if I learned on a spindle, I was never going to become a spinner on a spindle, because it just wasn't going to be the pace I wanted to learn at. And then towards the end of 2018, I was lucky enough to be essentially, I guess, sponsored by Kromsky. They sent me a spinning wheel to learn to spin on and to do sort of like a review on my channel over like a period of time and stuff. So like documenting my process. They didn't actually ask me to do that. They just asked me to use it for a project and to like share about it. But I kind of took it on. And this became this whole thing where I documented my spinning journey and learning to spin and like trying out all these different techniques and things. And I'm still kind of playing around with it and learning as I go. And yeah, and I sort of basically, I knew if I was going to learn to spin, it would be on a wheel. And the only reason I hadn't started sooner was logistically. We were living in apartments. We were like in the Middle East and then in New York, and we just never had the space to like realistically think about it. And at the time when Kromsky got in touch, we just moved in to our first home, and we were finally starting to settle down. We finally had a bit of space, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, now I can actually think about it. And had they not gone in touch with me, I probably would have come around to the idea of getting a wheel myself not long after. So it was just one of those things that was always on my mind that I wanted to learn how to do, but it was just a combination of factors that had like kept me back from starting. But then once I started, that was it. Like I was like, it wasn't so much a rabbit hole, more like a cliff edge. They just like went off the edge, and I'm like, that's it, I'm gone. So that's kind of how it was for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, less of a rabbit hole, more of a cliff edge.
Yeah. And you live in the south of England, and you've got your daughter.
Yes. Yeah.
And how old is she now?
She's going to be 4 at the end of this month. So in a couple of weeks, she'll be turning 4, which
so
is
fast.
Yeah.
I remember watching you pregnant. Like I remember, as you shared that journey. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. She's just such a little personality, shall we say. She's got a real personality to her, which is great. She's definitely her own little person and has her own opinions about how everything should be done. But no, she's great. She loves my spinning as well. Like she'll sit there and like watch the wheel go round. And when she was a little bit smaller and not quite so big, she would sit on my lap while I was spinning, and she'd love it. But yeah, she's a little bit too big to sit on my lap while I spin. It hurts my legs. I can't pedal.
So they're kind of in the way at that age.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thanks, Mina. So Marce, do you want to share next?
Surely. Hi, everybody. Welcome into this episode, and thank you, Rachel, for having us. I'm Marce. I am Hey Brownberry online in all the places, Ravelry, Etsy. I have a YouTube podcast, which is the Hey Brownberry Knitting Podcast, and Instagram as Hey Brownberry. I live in South Florida in the southeastern US, and the crafts that I love at the moment are knitting, spinning, crochet, and yarn dyeing mostly. I dabble on the sewing machine very ineffectively and with not much patience. And I'm really grateful for a couple of things. This is my second time being on an episode with Rachel, which is it's an indicator that I apparently am doing a lot of stuff that's fun and share worthy, and also that Rachel has her finger on the pulse of what's happening in the community, which I think is awesome. And,
sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Yeah. She's like, hey, there's a thing happening. Let me talk to the people who know about it. So I'm very grateful for that. Started knitting in 2005, and I am a multi-crafter by instinct. I get shiny squirrel syndrome about all things handmade, and made my way into spinning about 3 years ago. So it felt to me like a natural progression, because I find interest in how things are done. And so to me, spinning is like moving backwards in the process of how yarn comes to be. Mm-hmm. And having used yarn a lot in the last 16 years for knitting and crochet, and then learning how to dye and get the colors I want. Spinning for me is just a way to now create yarn in a very specific way. So I still consider myself a complete newbie, and that's okay. I don't mind that at all. The benefits of being a beginner.
Yeah.
What else? Yeah, I love the online community. I feel like there would have been a lot more negative feelings around living in a pandemic time if I wasn't a hand maker. So I'm pretty big on keeping connections. Yeah, right now they're mostly virtual, but generally speaking, if I have a brand, I think that's it. Just being connected to people through handmaids.
Yeah.
I am married to a very patient man, 25 years running. I have 2 daughters who are both in college, actually at the same university. And yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. I think you're right about the virtual community right now. I think many of us have really leaned heavily on it
Yeah.
and felt
Yeah.
that, that embrace, if you will, for sort of lack of a better term.
Yeah, I was spoiled having a year right before. So 2019 was a year of being literally all over the world. I saw Grace and Mina in multiple different countries.
It's amazing.
For fiber festivals and retreats and teaching opportunities. And then we went to living at home all the time, every day. So,
And thank goodness for those
different.
opportunities, hey, to kind of keep you
Yes.
going through all of this. Yeah.
Definitely. It was a confirmation at the time, just that, hey, there's a lot of people who are just as cuckoo about this stuff as you are, Marce, and they live everywhere and they're really great people. So that was nice to go into more of an isolated situation, knowing that there is a huge community out there and everybody's making a way. They're just making a way right now.
Yeah. And some people are more present online than others. But as a whole, I think everybody's sort of online a little bit so that they can keep in touch with one another. Yeah.
Exactly. Kudos to both Mina and Grace, who've been able to continue teaching and doing things like that are educational and inspiring, because I stopped teaching when the pandemic started. I did not go down the virtual teaching rabbit hole. I decided that I was actually going to become a student and take more workshops and take more classes because of it. So yeah, there's a space for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. All right, Grace, do you want to round us out? Tell us all about yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name's Grace, and I am coming to you from Ireland. We are in our 3rd super intense lockdown, which has no date of ending yet, which is super duper. But nothing's really changed for me because I work in a hospital, so I'm still going out and doing the thing. But you can find me online as Grace the Babbler on Instagram, and I have a YouTube podcast called Babble's Traveling Yarns. Not so much traveling anymore. I started it when I was traveling around the world, and you can actually follow me from scratch because I literally cast on my first pair of socks Christmas Eve, and then I left to go to Southeast Asia on St. Stephen's Day or Boxing Day or the 26th, the day after Christmas. And I started my podcast 2 months after that. So literally I was the babyest of knitters. And then I decided to document everything. So I am
What do you want to document? Sorry for interrupting, Grace. What made you want to document? Like, you were sort of a newbie, like brand new into your knitting journey. Like, what made you want to turn on the camera and do that?
I think I was just really inspired by loads of people. I started watching loads of other podcasts. I knew Mina, actually. Mina was the first podcast that I was watching, and I started watching her when I was trying to save money and not go anywhere or do anything. And I saw her on Facebook saying, oh, my new podcast is out. And I was like, what is she doing? Oh my God. And then I was like hooked. So I was really inspired by her and loads of the other podcasters. I was so interested in their lives and how they figured out things, how they figured out how things suited them, like different patterns. And it just seemed really approachable and really interesting, like that problem solving aspect of craft. My first degree was I was a fine art printmaker. That was my first degree. And I was really interested in bookbinding, especially, which is quite a methodical kind of aspect of craft. And then the 2008, 2009 recession hit, and I was like, hey, I need a job. So I went and did that instead. That happens. But then when I was traveling around, I was really interested. I suddenly like gone head first into this craft fiber fabric knitting world. And because I was traveling around Southeast Asia, I didn't see any knitters. So most of like the knitting podcasts that you'd see are mostly from Europe or from America, you know, and some from Australia as well. But so the fiber culture of Asia, kind of Southeast Asia where I was very different. It was crochet or weaving. So I was kind of hunting for these knitters, which were very limited. And it was really interesting way to travel and see a country was to find a yarn shop. Like first you had to find out what yarn meant in that language and how to search it on Google. So it was really interesting to do that. I didn't manage to film a lot of that because I wasn't filming at that time. I decided to start the podcast when I had settled in Perth in Australia, where I had a base, and there were a lot of interesting people around. So I was meeting up with them. I was meeting up with Peta from Dingo Dye Works and Yarnder Woman, Melinda from Yarnder Woman. And then I traveled around and I bought my first like sweater quantity of yarn, and I ended up working in Sydney as a radiographer there. And that's when I started going to my first kind of knit night. It was a way to kind of meet people and see and do things. So I met this girl called Kerry Pal, and I was really interested because I was learning so much. I think I'd started watching Patricia from Knitography and the Bakery Bears podcast, and I did some stuff for the Bakery Bears actually about cook traveling around, you know, because they're big into the history. And then I found your podcast, Rachel, as well, and I was just like, there's so much more to this. Like, I love gathering skills, and I think that's what it came from my art days. Is I loved learning how to do everything: lithography, screen printing, etching. Then I got into bookbinding. Then I got into and it was just, I think that's what I actually am. I am a skills gatherer, a collector of skills. And so I got into knitting. I got into crochet first, actually, because when I was doing baby blankets for ages, and then I really got into knitting when I started traveling. Because you could have a ball of yarn and it would keep you going a long time in your backpack. You know, crochet is a bit quick.
Yeah.
You know, you'd need a lot more yarn, and it's hard to shove a whole blanket for it in your bag. So so then when I met Kerry, and I was really interested in like yarn and wool and the properties of it. And she said, do you know what? My housemate has a sheep farm, a merino sheep farm. And I was like, oh, what's that? Suddenly I ended up with 3 bags of wool on my doorstep from this merino sheep farmer. Merino, what was I thinking? Merino is my first fleece, and it was like the super fine Australian merino, you know, this stuff that they use for like Arctic exploration. Oh, disaster. 2 inches long. Anyway, I did it. And because I was podcasting my whole journey, I was filming my whole journey through this, and I was like, this is a disaster. Someone contacted me and generously donated a wheel. I think she must have seen how pathetic I was in my little spindle, in my little flat. So I was just like Marce and Mina, like I just threw myself into it. And once I got on the wheel, there was no stopping me. It's just such a lovely, the speed of it was fabulous. I'm not the fastest knitter in the world. I do enjoy it. I enjoy the practicality of it, the transport and everything, but the actual zen speed of spinning is just lovely. So I shipped it home, shipped my wheel home with all my fluff around it, all the fluff I'd gathered, my whole stash that I'd gathered over a year and a half of traveling. And it made it. The box actually split open, but it still had everything in it. It was an actual miracle. I don't know how it made it, but you know what? The saints of spinning wheels was looking after me. The fluff gods, definitely. So and I got home and then I was like, Ireland, wool, sheep everywhere. No, that is not correct. Yes, there are sheep, but there is no wool. So it was then my mission in life to try and find like the good wool, to try and, I joined the guild, and unfortunately, the wool industry in Ireland has been decimated since lots of like tariffs are brought in from the UK and stuff. So the textile industry in Ireland has actually like plummeted. So the only thing sheep are good for is meat. So they don't breed for wool. So there's an interesting uphill battle going on currently in Ireland, but I'm loving it. I'm fascinated by it. And I've managed to get my hands on some lovely, lovely fleeces. Not that I have the time currently to do anything with them, but it's a possibility.
One day.
Yeah, one day. So that's me and my little spinning story. Anyway, I think I've been spinning since 2017. So 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you guys all knit with your hand spun and try to make with your hand spun? Like, do you try to kind of close that loop?
That is the plan. That is our plan.
I'm getting there.
You find, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm getting there.
I've knit a fair few things with my hand spun, so I've been making a really conscious effort to actually try and do that. But
yeah,
I just needed to have the experience. I started with a hat project that was already textured, and it was one of those moments of like, why haven't I done this before? I feel like I spent a good amount of time just being caught up with, wow, look at the kind of yarn you can make with this fiber, and then with this fiber, and then learning about, color and how you can work with a single braid and get different color out of it. I was really deep in that and felt like the hand spun was the finished object.
yeah.
Oh,
Do you think part of that, Marce, was because you were coming at it from a knitter's perspective? Like, you already had that base knowledge where you sort of had that appreciation for the properties of the yarn. You're aware of like yarn structure. You're kind of, it's percolating all back there in your head. So then you were sort of able to engage in the process of making the yarn rather than, like, I think a lot of new spinners come, this is just my observation. I think a lot of new spinners come to spinning and they're sort of like, they're sort of stuck in that, that really difficult learning curve of like, I'm making this thing, I'm not really sure how to use this thing. And yarn structure is such a huge issue for new spinners, but if you've got a big knitting background or weaving, if you're knitting to weave, you have that knowledge of how yarn, I'm going to use the word should, I hate shoulding on people, but should behave and should act. Yeah.
it's funny when you say that, because when I learned to spin, and because I was sharing the whole process literally from get-go when I got my wheel and sharing the process, a lot of people were like, knit with your early hand spun, knit with it so you can like understand it and work with it. And I didn't knit with my absolute first hand spun, but one of the things I remember hearing a lot on other podcasts and possibly on yours as well, Rachel, I can't remember who said it, and so many people say this, is to spin with fiber that you actually like and not with like practice fiber or like crappier fiber, whatever, like fiber that's not that great for spinning. Yeah, because just work with something that you like. And because I knew I was getting the wheel when I went to Rhinebeck that year, so I got the wheel a couple of weeks after I got back from Rhinebeck, I picked up a few braids from Into the World. I picked up a braid and a bat from them and a couple of things from somewhere else, but I basically sat down and I was like, you know what, screw it, I'll go to Rhinebeck again one year. I'll be able to get more. Like, there's always more fiber in the world. That was this whole thing that kept going through my head, being like, there's always more fiber in the world. So I opened up the bat and I spun it up and I pretty much knit it almost straight away afterwards. And I knit a hot water bottle cover.
That's wonderful.
And I kind of just made it up as I went along. And there again, I think being a knitwear designer and being comfortable with the maths of knitting and just making stuff up as I go along, that didn't terrify me. So I was like, oh, I'll just see how it goes. And then I actually did what Marce said that she was doing. I took that bat, I split it in half, and I think I did half of it as a 2-ply and half of it as a chain ply, just to see how it would be different. And like, I was experimenting, but then I striped it, and I striped the two different yarns together and just knit a hot water bottle cover, and I still use it. It works great.
Yeah.
That's like my very first like hand spun project that I from start to finish sort of did.
And you probably learned quite a bit, like I always talk about in our community, in the spirit of experimentation. Like that's kind of a phrase that I use all the time. And, I think we have to be okay to try things and to experiment with things and to see, wool is not wool is not wool. And something that you get from one source is going to be different from another source. But you're absolutely right, Mina, like the sheep will continue to grow it.
Yeah.
And I think, as long as we're sort of sourcing, know where our stuff is coming from and how we're sourcing it and where, all of that, I think, it's nice to support the industry as well,
Yeah.
on our learning journeys. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's always the thing that I would say to anyone who asks about learning to spin is like, use something that you actually really like the colors of or whatever, the fiber, the feel of it or whatever, and just play with it. Like you're not going to ruin it. To be honest, the worst thing you could do with fiber is just leave it on a shelf and not spin it, because like then what's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get me wrong, I'm very much guilty of having that like special fiber that I don't want to ruin, that is waiting for like the perfect project, but that's just because I don't want to spin it just to spin it. I want to spin it for a specific thing, so I'm just waiting until I realize what that thing is. But when you're first learning, you just want to experiment, and there's nothing. And that's the other thing as well. But I did a hot water bottle cover because there was no expectation for it to have to fit properly. It didn't have to be a hat that had to fit on a head or a pair of socks that had to fit on feet or anything like that. So it was like zero risk essentially.
Freedom. You were given, like you were giving yourself that freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of the three of us, I have yard for yard, I've knit the least of the three of us, but I'm realizing that that's because I didn't associate hand spun with fabric in an item when I started.
Interesting.
Association between fiber to yarn strands. So it was like, if my starting point is fiber and my destination is a type of yarn, it just felt like each hand spun project ended there. And just recently, I'm talking within months, I sit down at the spinning wheel now thinking about a kind of fabric I would like to create. And that's a different mindset. And if I'm not getting the kind of yarn that could potentially create that fabric, then I'm still working in the process toward that. Oh, this might be better as a 2-ply, or I should put more twist in it, or, this is not going to create the kind of fabric for a project. It's a very different association now.
What shifted for you?
Joining your lives on Saturdays.
Hearing a different conversation.
That's a huge part of why listening to you talk about your process is a huge part of why I sample now and why I swatch now and why I dive in the sense that I get excited about a fiber, but I don't dive in like, let me just spin all of this up and be done with it.
Interesting.
Finally knitting with my own hand spun. I knit a hand spun sweater. It's addictive. It's addictive to feel like you were a part of so much of a thing. And so I want more of that.
I remember sharing with you, Marce, when we chatted last time about one of my best friends is a jeweler, and she had started off in fashion design, and she found it really not particularly fulfilling because she couldn't design the fabric to design the clothing to make the clothing. So she went into jewelry because she could work with the raw materials and go all the way through. And her and I talk about it all the time. And I know you and I talked about it last time. Like there's just nothing like going from a raw, unprocessed, even if we're working with comb top and stuff, we're still dealing with sort of the thing before it becomes another thing, before it becomes the final thing,
Right. It's addictive.
How about you, Grace? Because you're
Absolutely.
dealing with a slightly different, like I know you're trying to source stuff in Ireland, and I know you mentioned about the wool industry. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, because we've got some of the same problems here in North America.
Yeah. It's really interesting actually. So I've after from being with the guild and working with you know, a lot of people, and I'm part of like there's this hop in WhatsApp for all the Midwest spinners, and we all like have like our links now to the good wool. You know, we have the farmer up in North Tipperary who's the good Romney, and then there's a lad over in Wicklow now who is amazing BFL, but like he only has about 6 of them. So you know, you know, and it's so funny. Ireland is a very small community in all ways. I mean, there are 5 million of us, but everybody knows each other. So it's quite an interesting place to be, a place to come back to, because I was actually away for 7 years. So it was really, and most of my friends had actually left during the recession, because that's what Irish people do. We emigrate. So I didn't actually have any friends when I moved back. I had my family, and that was it. So it was actually absolutely wonderful to have this community to just jump in and have a source of, you know, familiarity and community. And I've made so many amazing instant friends from this sort, you know, working with wool and working with knitting and all sorts of things like. And there were some fantastic people here, because we do have such a huge history of spinning and wool. Johnny Shields, he is the only Irish wheelwright, that's what they call it. And he's asked me to come up to Donegal to watch him like make his wheels, and I'm like, yes, like they're old, ancient, like giant chunks of wood, like they're they're actually traditionally Scottish flax wheels. So it's this huge like historical memory, but it's still quite close, and I think people are still quite keen on fast fashion, because it's like, you know, we only started having fast fashion maybe 40 years ago. Before then, like all of my uncle's school uniforms would have been knitted by his mother, you know. So we're not that far away from a third world country. Ireland's kind of development has been really, really fast. So I think there's still kind of well, why would you do that? Why would you bother? Like, that's the poor person's idea. Whereas for me, it's like a pure luxury to be able to like go back in time and just kind of trace back how to make it. And I think my eventual goal in this kind of tracing back down, you know, making the wool, you know, getting the fiber, getting it spun, is like eventually having sheep, and then living in a forest and becoming a spirit. My eventual goal is to become a dryad, I think. But anyway, in the meantime,
I think it's an interesting thing, because Ireland is still in a lot of ways it's a very old country, and in other ways it's a very new country. And I remember feeling that tension when we were there, and you know, very, very much in Dublin, that tension that exists.
Very,
compared
very
to Belfast, that's still very much sort of ingrained in a different history. So I really appreciate what you're saying, because, you know, as soon as I think of Ireland, I think Donegal's tweed and the, you know, all of the textiles that came out of that, and now that's been made into this commercial sort of branding that you can get Donegal tweed, but like it's made in China, you know, and it's just mimicking and using the name. And it's very interesting, these different areas of the world that are like you say, it's quite close history, but in so many ways it's not that close.
So old. There's a really interesting story, actually. I went up to Belfast, just speaking about Belfast, and I did this, do you know, the Game of Thrones tour up there? And there was a guy that was leading us around. He was really cool. He actually turned out to be a medieval reenactor. And he was hired because he had the long hair and he had all the kit. And they were like, great, get all these lads in the background. He was an extra. I think he fell off the wall at some stage. It was hilarious. It was a really good tour. But I got talking to him, and it turns out I know like 5 or 6 of his friends, because it's so Ireland. It's so small. So there was a tablet weaver who's a spinner and who was a spinning wheel dealer. Basically, you have her number and she'll find you a wheel. And then she knew my spinning teacher down in Limerick, who also is part of my guild. And it was just so funny. And then I kind of got the idea because he was wearing like these, you know, these big hand woven cloaks, and I'd got into weaving from the spinning guild. And that's when I decided to try and get a fleece from a sheep and go the whole way through and weave a cloak. I have got one skein spun, but it's a long-term project. But it's just so interesting how the idea for the project came about, because all these like small little people communities kind of connecting through this really fine thread, because it's such a niche thing. I just love it so much. That's just what brings me pure joy in the industry. And industry, I guess it is a kind of an industry, but
The maker
wonderful.
community.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah,
It's so small. Yeah.
So
We all
small.
overlap in so many ways. Yeah.
Totally. Mhm.
Where in the south of England are you, Mina?
I'm actually in Kent, so
Oh, okay.
I'm just south of London, kind
Yeah.
of between London and the south coast.
Yeah. Okay. My dad's born and raised in the south of England, and we've been lots over the years. So we used to have family still there. They've all died now, but
Oh no.
I've spent a lot of time in like the Guildford area and down around Portsmouth, and yeah. So
Yeah.
so what's the community, the local community like around where you are?
I will be honest, I don't know that many knitters or spinners around where I am. I know a couple of people who are knitters who live close-ish by. There is a group of knitters who, what do they go by, like Socks on the Beach on Instagram, I think, and on I think they have a Facebook group or a Ravelry group, I can't remember now, but it's Socks, SOX. And they used to have regular meetups like every month or every couple of months, and I would go whenever I was able to make it work, because they would always be on a weekend, and so obviously family. So I understand why they did it on weekends, because most people have jobs that they have to go to work. This is pre-COVID, obviously. So not everyone is a stay-at-home person who works from home or has that flexibility to be able to like pick up in the middle of the week and do something. So and because of where it was located, where the meetups were usually located, and the way the transport system here in the UK works, everything, all the trains, especially when you're in one of the, what they call the home counties, or like one of the counties surrounding London, if you want to go somewhere that's a little bit away from where you are, you end up having to go into London to come back out of London to go to that place, because all trains go to London, like
Totally.
all lines lead to London. Like I said, especially if you're in the home counties, because it's all like centered around people commuting into and out of the city.
Of course.
Same as Dublin. Dublin's the same.
Yeah,
So,
they're all bedroom communities, right? So it makes
yeah,
sense.
I mean, it makes sense. It makes logical sense why they have it that way. But like, if you want to go from one side of Kent to another side of Kent, you have to go via London, which seems really counterintuitive. But so I'd either have to take the car, and we're a one-car household, so it's either like my husband and daughter can't go anywhere because I've taken the car, or I mean, they have to stay local, or they've got plans to go somewhere, and I have to figure out another way to get to where I'm going. So sometimes they'd meet up in London, and that would be easier for me to go to, because it would be much easier with the train to go that way. And other times I would go if I can, but it was very sporadic, and I wasn't able to go as frequently as I would have liked. And obviously now with COVID, that's all kind of gone out the window. But yeah, so that's kind of where my community's at. I still, Fluff, sorry, I'm spinning while I was talking, I get fluff in my mouth. But it's funny, because I've actually, similar to Grace, been living all over the world for the last few years. We've actually only been back in the UK for, this is what now, 3 years? I think we've been back 3 years now, just about. So we actually moved to Dubai first, and I found a local knitting community there when I first learned to knit. So a few months after I learned to knit, I found them, and I'm still in touch with a lot of the ladies from that group. They're a really lovely bunch, and kind of like really took me in, and kind of like, I knew nothing about hand-dyed yarn or anything like that before I met them. I was of, when I first started to learn to knit, I was very much of the mind of, because I remember shortly after I learned to knit, we were planning, my husband and I were going to New York for a trip and a couple of other places, and I was looking up yarn shops in New York, and I came across one I remember looking online, this makes me laugh now because it's ridiculous, but I remember looking online at the price of the yarn and I was like, who in their right mind pays that much money for yarn? Like, I could not wrap my head around it. I thought it was absolutely bonkers. I was like, why? I was like, who in their right mind? Anyway, I came back, I found the knitting group and I was like, okay, all right, now I know. These people do.
These people do.
Anyway, having never been exposed to it, having never known like what it felt like compared to acrylic, and having learned with acrylic and thinking to myself, acrylic's just fine. And I was also of the mindset, and this is obviously how a lot of non-knitters think, is that, oh, if you're doing knitting as a hobby, then it must be cheaper than buying the physical product at the end of the day. I very much came from it from that perspective. So, oh, knitting my own clothes should be cheaper than being able to go out and buy it off the rack.
Right.
Essentially. All right. I didn't have necessarily, and again, I was completely self-taught. So I had none of that community influence, shall we say. I had none of that influence from the knitting community to be like, oh, this is how you should think about your yarn. This is how you should think about knitting. This is what you should, quote unquote, should think about this and
should
that.
word again.
The should word, yeah. How you should this and that. So it was only after I got exposed to it a bit more that I learned a bit more and I understood the value of it a bit more, and it kind of grew to learn more about it essentially. And I understood why people would like to use hand-dyed yarn and nicer, like actual animal fibers or wool yarn rather than acrylic. And I think there's a time and a place for acrylic. And I have nothing against anyone who chooses to use acrylic for whatever their reasons are. But I slowly sort of like moved over towards the nicer natural yarns, shall we say. And then we moved to Bahrain. I tried really hard to start like a knitting group in Bahrain, but most of the people who came were crocheters, and I suddenly became the only knitter in the group of crocheters. And that didn't last very long either. It kind of became really sporadic. It got hard to like get people together and stuff. And then it kind of just fell apart. And actually went shortly after we moved to Bahrain, I think it was about a month or so after we moved, I started my podcast because I'd lost that community essentially when we moved. And I was like, what can I do to create a community for myself? I can create one online and I can try to create one in person. One didn't work out, one did. So, and then from Bahrain, we moved to New York. But because of the whole podcasting thing, I already had a lot. And we traveled to New York a lot because my husband was studying for an MBA and he had a lot of classes in New York as well. So we were traveling over, he was traveling over to New York every few months. And whenever it was possible, I would go with him. So I got to meet up with lots of other knitters in New York through the podcasting world. I got to meet other people. And then when we eventually moved to New York, I already had a base of friends. I already had a group of people there. So that was really nice. And then we moved back to the UK. And again, because we're from here, even though my husband, neither of us are actually from the town where we live now, we're obviously both from the UK. I'm from London. My husband's from Guernsey, which is one of the Channel Islands. But we both have friends around where we live now, like nearish enough. So we had our like I had my non-crafty friends, I had my non-knitting friends, my non-making friends, I guess, my pre-muggles.
Friends.
Yeah, muggles, shall we say. And then obviously but then I knew people again in the fiber community around London and the South and stuff like that through these other groups and just through podcasting in general. But speaking about muggles, it was really funny. I was going to a friend's hen party before she got married, and it was really funny. It was the perfect thing for her as well. Like, we went axe throwing. It was amazing. It was so much fun, and I learned I would be great with an axe in a zombie apocalypse.
Perfect. I want to on my team.
Yeah, but it was really funny because afterwards we were walking and one of the girls was saying, oh, this was such a great hen party. I would absolutely hate like if we had a crafting hen party thing. I was like, that sounds like it would be really fun. In the background, I was like, that sounds like it would be okay. Like everyone has their thing that they're into. Some people just aren't into crafting and making, and some people are. But I've been lucky that wherever we've gone, other than Bahrain was the one place where neither of us ever felt like we really settled in. We didn't really make any friends there. We didn't know anybody. It never really felt right for us. It wasn't a good fit. It served a purpose. Don't regret doing it, but it wasn't it wasn't a long-term situation for us. So it was never going to work long-term. So, but other than that, we settled everywhere we went. We made friends wherever we went, or we already knew people. And yeah, you know, I'll never say never to moving abroad again, but at the moment we're happy where we are.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it changes when you've got kids, right? Like, you know,
It
that
does. Like you kind of want more stability for them. Not even that, actually. I think for me, it's less about the not wanting to move her around and more about now, because she was born in New York when we were living there.
Right.
And at the time, I was happy to stay in New York long term. And then our visa situation worked out. We had to move back to the UK. And after we moved back, and having been here after we'd been here about a year or so, and we bought our home and we moved in and we were getting settled, I turned back to my husband. I was like, look, I'd be happy to move abroad again, but I couldn't take her away from her grandparents. Like I couldn't do that now, because she's got both sets of grandparents in the UK. And she's got such a close bond with both of them. Like earlier, we were FaceTiming with my husband's mum, and Layla just walked off with his phone for like an hour. And they were like, and then I went down to like, it's like, is she still on the phone? And he was like, yeah. Like an hour and a half later, like she's still like chatting away with her granny. And like I can't take that away from her. I mean, I know COVID has like ruined that sort of, not ruined it, but it's stopped the being able to go around and see people and like stay over and things like that. But you know, I can't take that away from her right now. She's too young. She's too young. Maybe when she's older or something. But just for right now, we're happy where we are. It would have to be an incredible opportunity that one of those things that you really can't say no to for us to like really consider it at this point. I think we're pretty much set where we are right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe in the future.
Yeah. Never say never, like you say.
Yeah. I always said, you know, things have come up in the last couple of years, and I've always said to my husband, don't say no to anything straight off. Like always consider it. Talk to me about it. We'll consider it. But yeah.
So tell me, you guys, about your Fluff to Stuff. How did it come about? How all the alongs, the stuff you guys are creating, how did the three of you connect?
Well, actually, I knew Grace from before either of us knew anything about fiber crafts.
Before.
The long before. It was like, what, 10 years ago, wasn't it? It came up. It was it 10 years
worked
ago?
it out. Yeah, it was 10 years ago.
It was about 10 years ago. So it was like 2011. I came over to Ireland, actually, with my now husband, at the time boyfriend. And I was visiting a friend of mine who lived in Limerick. And I knew him, and I knew one of his friends, who turned out to be Grace's brother. Anyway, so my friend who we were staying with invited him and his family around for barbecue one night, and that's when I met Grace. We've been friends on like Facebook ever since, pretty much.
Yeah, I think I started following you. And my sister actually started following you because of your Catterday posts. Because oh my goodness, the cutest cats in the world. And then
that's how Grace and I knew each other. And then I remember just before Grace left to go traveling, she messaged me being like, oh, I have like these things, like, do you want them? I was like, yeah, sure. So she shipped me like a bunch of like notebooks that you'd made and some fabric. And I made you a project bag and sent it back to you.
I still have it. It's so cute.
So that's how Grace and I knew each other. And then I remember getting to know Marce on Instagram when I first learned to spin. Marce got in touch with me and we got chatting on Instagram, and that's basically like it just took off from there essentially.
I'll tell you the real story, Rachel. I am basically their biggest fan who became that's how it happened. I'm gonna tell you the real deal.
I can't remember, Marce. I can't remember how we met.
Isn't it crazy?
I knew you knew each other before I got to know Marce, because I remember hearing Grace talking about Marce a lot on her podcast.
Yeah.
And then I feel like I've known her forever.
It feels like that. I think what happens is if you are a person who either puts content out online or content online, you start bumping into some of the same people in different circles.
It's not a big world.
No, there was a time where there were like virtual knit nights that were happening, and I joined Grace's, and both Grace and Mina were podcasters before I really got into it. So I was consuming their content for a long time before ever reaching out to them. And I just have accepted that sometimes we say this in the Caribbean, your spirit takes to somebody, and they've always been like But I can tell you guys that now, not that many years since we got to know each other, I've stayed with Grace. I've been out with Mina. We've done so many things that you would do with someone that you've known for 20 years. And it's been maybe 5 or 6 that we've been,
Not even. I think they're like
not
3.
even, right?
Not
Yeah.
even.
So
Yeah.
it has everything to do with a person's energy that makes you interested in what they're doing. And then the way they are once you do, if you are lucky like I was to meet them in person, like the way they are in real life is the next step to it. And then underneath all of that is we like a lot of the same stuff and we have a lot of things in common. So an Instagram message that becomes a long thread of chatting and I'm going to this festival. Are you going to? These two, by the way, are the best people to travel with. Like
I bet. I can
Mina
see
will
that.
have the food situation sorted. Grace will have entertainment and tours sorted. Like you
I
don't
like
have
it.
to really worry about it. So
I'm gonna be the fourth wheel. I'm gonna start like tagging along.
highly
Oh my
recommend.
God, Rachel, yes.
Highly
Yes,
recommend.
yes.
So yeah, I was just a fan that became a friend, and I also watched both of them approach, like Grace said, skill gathering in a very specific way that resonates for me. I think the three of us are natural teachers, but we're also voracious learners. From my perspective, my admiration of them was like, I want to be friends with this person. I like the way they approach fiber arts. And I was lucky enough to see, what they did what they chose to do in the community and want to be part of that. That's kind of the original genesis. As far as our new spin and make along that we're talking about, again, I just put myself in their business.
Right. It's so funny. It's kind of true, but
It's true.
It was so funny because I learned like I said, I first learned to spin towards the end of 2018.
Right.
We got to the beginning of 2019 and I was like super deep into this whole spinning thing, and I was like, how do I bring other people into this? Like, how do I get other people as obsessed about it as I am? And like my Marce and Grace has said about like skill gathering, for me, when I first learn something or decide I want to learn something new, I very much kind of like, I take on as much information as is practically and physically possible in as short a space of time as I can. So when I first learned to knit, I just consumed as much knitting content, videos, whatever I could, at the very beginning, even before I picked up a knitting needle. And then even once I picked up a knitting needle, it kind of like continued from there. And then when I decided to learn to spin, again, it was the same. It was like, I created this long playlist of videos that I wanted to watch. Many of them were yours, Rachel.
Oh,
and
thank you.
Rachel. And like as many tutorials as I could watch, as many videos, as much conversation as I could absorb about spinning. Even before I got my wheel, I was already starting to like take all that on. And it's kind of very much like I absorb as much as I can. And I actually started learning about watercolors last year. And it's the same with that. Like, it doesn't matter what it is, just absorb as much information as possible. And then just keep practicing, keep trying new things. And so I was kind of in this mindset, and I was like, what about if we have like this big along that like runs all year, and I will keep the momentum going and all this and that. And of course, because I knew Grace for such a long time, and she was actually one of the people that inspired me to get into spinning as well, like watching her journey with spinning kind of got me more excited about learning to spin as well. So I got in touch with her. I was like, Grace, do you want to co-host this with me? Because I was like, if I want to, and I'm notoriously bad at keeping up with Ravelry groups and threads and stuff, so I kind of wanted to do this with someone else so it wasn't all on me. So just for someone to share it with, essentially. And Grace was like, yeah, sure, why not? And like just jumped into it with me. And then Marce like really jumped in and like partook in the actual event. And I can't remember when it was or what it was, but Marce made a comment at one point about being like, if you need help, let me know, kind of thing. And so
I am going to be in on this. You guys don't know it.
And I remember thinking at the time, like, I was like, why didn't I ask Marce? I don't know why, but okay, maybe it was. It was probably because I didn't know her as well at that point, and so it was more just out of my very British sense of like, don't want to put
Oh, I
myself in a
couldn't-
great
oh, I
position to
couldn't
like ask to
possibly.
be rejected sort of thing. Like, like slightly like, you know, putting yourself out there kind of
Yeah,
feeling. It's a bit
it's
awkward
scary.
sometimes. But with Grace, it was comfortable because it's someone I knew, so it didn't feel so scary.
Yeah.
Even though, bear in mind, I'd only met her that one time in Ireland, and I didn't meet her
Yeah.
again in person. I didn't meet her again in person until I had Layla, and she came and saw me in New York.
But you had a very fresh Layla. Like that
She was
was
only
like
3 weeks
maybe
old.
the week, 3 weeks old. And I was like, this is probably inappropriate.
No, not at all.
Well, you're in such a fog at that point, right, Mina? Like you have no idea which way is up.
I don't know how, but by some
like,
miracle, she slept through the entire 3 hours that Grace visited with me.
The whole
She felt
thing.
it was meant to be.
She never sleeps that. She never
I was
slept.
like,
Oh God.
I was like, in my mind, I was like, she should be sleeping as well. Mina should be sleeping too. This is,
It
but
was fine.
I
And
was
you
in the
know
middle of.
what, actually, it's funny because everyone says that, but the first month that Layla was born was not that hard for me at all because my mum was there, and so it was like 3 against 1. We had it down. It was okay. My mum took a lot of the night shifts, but anyway, getting back to the spinning thing.
Yeah, sorry.
So we did that for 2019, and then obviously 2020 happened, and that just went out the window. And also my wheel got put aside for most of that year. And then it got towards the end of 2020, and I was like, look, I really want to get back to my spinning wheel. I really want to get back to like getting into the flow of it. And I was like, well, let's do the spin and make along again. It worked so well the first time. It'll be great. Let's do it again. And by this point, the 3 of us had like a WhatsApp group anyway. And so I was like, hey, ladies, do you want to do this with me? And they were like, yeah, sure, why not?
That's
And
really
it kind of
cool.
just went from there. We had a couple of Zoom calls together to kind of like talk through some of the details. And yeah, and then at one point, I think we were still going to go with the spin and make along, or like the smell as like the name for it. And it got to the end of like a Zoom call, and then Marce sort of just came out with, I can't wait to see all your fluff turn to stuff. And I was like, that's it, that's the name.
It was so random. You have this moment, you have this moment where, and I really was just like, oh, we're going to be turning our fluff into stuff. And all 3 of us went quiet and we're like, wait.
Yeah, we were like, that's
what we're calling
That's it.
That's amazing.
So yeah, that's how that happened. And it just, I was never like, spin and make along was, this again comes back to like how my brain works. It's like very practical, very like literal, and very to the point. Like, this is what it is, and that is what I'm calling it. Like, I have a really hard time coming up with creative ways of naming things, or like fun, quirky alliterations and stuff like that. So when Marce came up, I was like, you know what, I can't do any better than that. That works. Let's stick with that.
That's phenomenal. It's kind of
like I feel like I earned my spot as the third person on the wheel.
Oh, Marce is doing all of the Zoom stuff. She's doing all of the communication stuff. She's doing all the, like, there's so much. I feel like I am this third wheel at this moment in time.
Not at all.
Purely here for comedic relief now at this point, but you know.
I'm so happy it's happening again. I mean, the basics for anyone who doesn't know yet.
Fluff I was going to say, do you want to explain the basics?
Sure. Fluff to Stuff 2021 is, as Mina said, it's a spin and make along. So the idea is spin your fiber, make some hand spun, and then make with it. So use your fluff, turn it into stuff. And we recognize that there are knitters out there, crocheters out there, weavers out there. There are folks who use yarn even for art, you know, mixed media. There's so many ways that you can use yarn, and there's something about it being hand spun yarn that again just connects you more to the process. And so I think we're keeping with the original theme of a spin and make along, and taking that idea and trying to make it as accessible as possible. Part of what's happening this year is the event, I feel like it's an event, runs for 10 months, February to November. And we're doing everything we can to expose people to fiber producers in the community. We're doing what we can to connect people who spin and make with hand spun. And we've set it up so that you can find us in a bunch of different places online. You can join in as a spinner and show us your beautiful hand spun, and join in as a maker and show us your beautiful projects. But also we're doing monthly Zoom meetings, which I think is a way to keep the momentum going all year.
Mhm.
And each month we've already had our first January meeting. We plan to have about 40 folks or so on a Zoom meeting and include featured guests so that we can learn a bit more about individual spinners and fiber producers in the community, and let people within the community who join that Zoom meeting ask them questions about their making journey and spinning journey. And we have merch. These two are artists in their own right and have created gorgeous imagery for merchandise so people can commemorate their participation. I just am very proud already this early on into the event. I'm very proud of the way we've thought of all the angles at which someone can approach this. You don't have to only be on Ravelry. You can participate on Instagram. You can be part of the Zoom meetings or not. And you could just quietly lurk. You can use the hashtag and just quietly lurk along with us all year. I think it's one of the best make-alongs I've been part of because of how much we've tried to focus on making it accessible.
Yeah, that was really important for you.
Yeah, and the other aspect that was always important to me, especially because I was such a new spinner when the original along started, was like there was no restrictions in terms of the quantity of yarn you had to produce or the quantity of fiber that you had to spin or the method of your spinning or creating or making. It just had to be something that constituted a challenge for you, I guess, in whatever you thought of it, is picking some fiber and deciding this is going to be a hat and then spinning it intentionally to make a hat out of it at the end. If that was the challenge, then that qualified you. That was fine.
Yeah.
We kind of now opened it up even more than that, kind of like just whatever you want. And even if you just spin and you don't happen to get to the making portion, that's fine too. You can still enter for the spinning portion, because you kind of can enter prizes for the spin and for the make, or the fluff and the stuff side of it. So, if you spun a whole bunch of stuff but you only managed to like knit some of your yarn or crochet or whatever, some of your yarn into a finished project, then that's fine too. Like there's really no set parameters. There's no like specific requirements for partaking. There's only some requirements for actually submitting, in that you have to post in the right thread and you have to use the right hashtag. But other than that, that's really it.
The hashtag is Fluff to Stuff 2021, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
I believe so. And it's also open to people who don't spin. If you don't spin and you want to take part, you just have to get hold of handspun, whether you buy it or it's given to you or you win it in a prize, whatever. Like, as long as you use some handspun, then you can still take part in the making portion. Even if you don't spin. So like I've tried to make it as accessible as physically possible to as many people as want to take part, sort of thing. So yeah.
That's very cool. It's kind of like Zero to Hero in our community that we do every year.
Nice.
Yeah, where you start with your fluff and you go all the way through to the finished project. And I'm curious to hear from you guys, being you guys have been spinning for a few years now, that initial taking that on and going from something like a raw fiber, whether it's wool or something else. I spent quite a long time yesterday with our queries and explorations group going through spinning silk, because there were just so many questions, and it's a small group that meets after the live stream. And we ended up kind of going down this rabbit hole of all the things with silk. And that was one of the things that like it kept coming up, was like, I've got this beautiful fiber. It doesn't have to be wool. How do we use it? How do we go from that fiber all the way through and envision that project? And I think it's important for those of us who are invested from the standpoint of wanting to share our making with others and share the joy that we get from going all the way through. But sort of hand-holding and going through the process, like it's really overwhelming when you're first going through that for the first time.
Yeah, it really is.
Grace is a model for this with her woven fabric that's been turned into clothing.
Yeah.
It's my most favorite thing, because it's actually so quick at the end. It's very satisfying at the end, but it's really interesting. I was the first guest kind of as a run through at the end of January, and it was just to kind of kick it off, and there was some really, really interesting questions that came up about specific questions about like wool and fleece. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to most about this challenge. And it's actually the same as the Zero to Hero. It's quite similar in that just to build a community so that you're able to ask these questions about, oh, I'm working with this and I'm just not sure. There's no spinners around me. I can't find any information. Just to have, like, either on the Ravelry or on an Instagram post or on the Zoom groups, if you have a question, like if you have something that, to pop it in there and ask a question, and we're able to work through. I mean, I think last time we were talking about flax, Marina was talking about, she was spinning flax, and I'm having huge difficulty weaving with a blend of flax. But then there was another like spinner who has a wealth of knowledge, and she was saying, oh, you should use toe flax and mix it in with the wool, and then it will work a little bit better. And I just learned so much, and I think there's just such a benefit to having so many other people involved in the community with all this knowledge to share it, because honestly, like, that's the only way that you can definitely, like the way Mina learns at the start, she gathers all the facts and the figures and she works all the way through that. But then spinning is such a tactile, like, that's, I did the same thing. I had the JC Bob Faulkner class from Worcester to Woolen, and then the Felicia Lowe class, working with so the color, that's it, spinning dyed fiber. And I learned so much from those, but then at the same time I learned 5 million times more from spinning, talking about it, people commenting underneath with suggestions, this sort of feedback back and forth. It's the only way to do it for me. So that's why I'm just really excited.
Having a conversation, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Rachel, you've created this, and you talk about Zero to Hero, and what I see as a similarity is the motivation that comes from doing something in community.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think anyone, even an experienced spinner, would say spinning the amount of hand spun you need for a sweater is an easy project. I think we all acknowledge that that's a big undertaking. And there's something to having people you could be accountable to and you could learn from to take on that big project. I learned this being in the Slack group with you and your other patrons. Sometimes I want to just go in there and post that I'm thinking about doing a thing, because now a bunch of people have seen that post, and it's like,
you're accountable.
I'm probably actually going to do this now because I have said it to people publicly. So I think Fluff to Stuff and Zero to Hero acknowledges that impact for maybe what is a bigger undertaking. Even if it's not a big item you're doing, maybe just sitting down and spinning for any project for you might feel big. And it's nice to have online cheerleaders.
Exactly. And it's part of that, like this spin 15 a day, getting people to set that time aside for themselves and to make themselves a priority. Like nobody else is going to do that for you, which I experienced this morning. You have to do that yourself, that this is sort of, it's not, I used to see it as being so selfish, and I've really had to like change my thinking around it, because I really, you sort of have to realize, I think as women especially, and as givers, if we're not putting ourselves out front, how in the tarnation are we going to look after our kids? Like, you're at this great age right now, Mina, with Layla, where, she's sort of in that really physically intense stage, but then as they get older, there's, Marce, there's the emotional needs, right? Like,
it's just different. There's
like
needs, but they're different.
Exactly. James and I were heading home this morning from the grocery store, and like he started crying, and I was like, no, what's wrong? And he's like, well, I feel so badly that this has happened, that you have to now go to work. And I was like, well, yeah, but this is like, things happen, like, mistakes are made and things happen. And, I was feeling emotional, and they reflect all of that back. And I'm thinking, like, if I'm not looking after me, and we're all not sort of looking after ourselves and putting some of these projects that we want to do out there on the table, and being accountable to a community and having that conscientiousness to do that and to do life with one another, we're kind of up a creek in this modern world,
Definitely.
I don't discount my current progress. I don't discount the impact of choosing to do it and include other people. I really think that's been a huge part of any progress I've made in making.
Mm.
And hearing you acknowledge that we do need to do the self-loving thing to focus on something like craft and handmade. I think a lot of people feel that. The response that we've gotten to Fluff to Stuff shows me that a lot of people would prefer to do this as a community effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's why people are feeling it so much with the lack of festivals right now and the lack of gathering. And like just as an example, I was supposed to be, it was going to be a surprise because we were going to surprise, Marce will know who I'm talking about, but we were going to surprise Eve in our community. So me and Erica of Weevolution had sort of started to put everything together for me to be in Bristol for the festival that happens right at the end of April, beginning of May.
And of course, Eve Walker, is it?
Yeah.
Eve Walker.
Yeah,
I love Eve.
Right? She's so great. And so I was going to be at that festival. No, not in Bristol. It's the one in Wales. Sorry. That happens in
Wonderwall.
Yeah.
Was it Wonderwall?
Yeah, it's the only one that
because it was canceled, obviously, because of the COVID. And so it makes me, that's why we're feeling it so acutely. It's like this is how we gather, this is how we acknowledge one another and do life together, right? Because we are spread out around the world. Like all of our respective communities are they completely personify that. We're all so spread out, and especially in parts of Europe. And actually the US isn't much different, where you've got there's one of us in a community that would have traditionally had many people doing these things.
Yes.
And we just don't have that.
No. On this call, we've got 4 countries now.
Yeah, totally.
I know.
It's kind of the way our community works now. I feel that it's the way our community works now. It is not uncommon to have a true feeling of international connection, thankfully.
Mm-hmm.
And post-COVID, this is not going to be any different. This is going to be the same. If anything, COVID has helped people to connect this way and become more comfortable on Zoom. Like, I'm sure you guys even remember being on Zoom in March and April, and everybody was speaking over each other and, interrupting and not muting, and and now we're just doing it like it's a thing.
We've done it actually on the first Zoom meeting that we had. Marce was running through some of the general how to use Zoom, and Grace made a comment of has anyone actually been able to get through this last year without being on a Zoom meeting once? Has anyone actually managed to do that? Probably not.
Totally.
At least not anyone who was on the call.
And we see our grandparents and our seniors in our community, they are getting pretty tech savvy.
Yeah.
They've got the FaceTime, they've got the Zoom.
I remember the first, actually, now that Marce has reminded me of how we properly met, I was in Tasmania. I was doing a locum stint down there, and I was literally at the bottom of the world. There's nobody there. There was people there, but no knitters. So I was like, right, I'm gonna have to make my own meeting. Mm-hmm. So I put it up on Instagram, and I think it was Shannon from Soxetra had a online international knit night thing, and then I took it over from her because she was quite busy, and that was the first time I started using Zoom. So actually we'd used Zoom for a long time before that. And that's how and I think I made plans to go to Edinburgh, to literally travel all the way across the world, staying at other podcasters' houses all the way across to Edinburgh, and then finally meeting everyone in Edinburgh. It was such an epic journey, and it was all because of Zoom.
That's amazing.
You spend enough time with people, you can see them, you know what their voices sound like, you get used to what they're like. And so to meet them in person it feels more like a half step.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was no problem at all. It was very, very easy.
Yeah.
No.
And I was really glad. I don't know if it was Mina or Grace who came up with the idea to add the Zoom meeting feature to.
I don't remember. I think it was Mina.
Yeah, Mina. Yeah, it's genius.
was thinking about it from the perspective of like, well, people have virtual knit nights. And the funny thing is, prior to COVID, and even during COVID, I never actually attended any virtual knit nights, mainly because of timing. And either the timings didn't work out, or it would like, other things would be happening at the same time. There'd be other commitments. And so it was just always hard for me to commit to like this night every week or every other week or whatever for like a call or something like that. So I never actually attended any myself, but it was after attending the Cannes retreat that Marce had organized at the end of last year that I really started to appreciate more the value of having these sorts of like Zoom socials, essentially. I mean, we'd had with our like friend groups, we'd had like the quiz nights, the weekly pub quizzes on Zoom and whatever's that, but that's always different because it's obviously just chatting. It's not a making orientated like, space. So it hadn't crossed my mind until having attended that retreat and seeing how well it worked. And it's like a virtual event. So I remember even saying to Marce, like afterwards, I was like, prior to this, I had my doubts about how well it would work and how much would it really feel like a community? Like how much would it really feel like you're at a retreat when you're just in a computer in a room in your house sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it really works. And it was like having been through that and then organizing all of this, I was like, well, hey, why don't we do like a Zoom thing as well to kind of add to that sense of community, because we're not going to be, well, it's unlikely that we're going to have many, if any, fiber events this year that we will be able to go to, or that many people would be able to travel to, and if they did exist, to be able to like have a physical meetup, because that was something I was thinking of that would be really fun to do for like a future year. For example, if we do this again, that we could meet up at Rhinebeck, or we can meet up at Edinburgh or whatever, and have like a little get together in these places. Because we can't do that at the moment, doing it on Zoom is the next best thing. And genuinely, I don't think this whole Zoom thing is going to go away even post-COVID.
No, I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be even more because we're going to be used to it and we're going to want to connect.
And because another thing is also from August, so last summer, I started teaching online with Vogue. Started teaching classes online. And again, I had my doubts about how well it would work. And actually, I found that for some of the stuff that I teach, it actually works better than in-person teaching for some parts of it, like for the actual demonstration part. It's so much easier to demonstrate to your whole class on a Zoom call with an overhead camera than to go around each table and to redo the same thing 10 times so everyone can see. And by the time you've gotten to the last table, the first table has a bunch of questions and you're constantly running around in circles trying to get to everybody. So for some things, the Zoom call works really well. And the Zoom classes, when you're teaching, are so much more affordable than in-person classes, because the company organizing the events don't have those overheads that they have to pay for and like charge for and include in the ticket costs. So it just makes it so much more accessible. And even pre-COVID, for the people who couldn't afford to travel or who couldn't travel for whatever other reasons, I don't think these Zoom things are going to go away. Like you said, I think it will stick around. It will just be what it is. The in-person things will happen again, but so will the Zoom things will continue as well. And I think it's not a bad thing.
I wonder too if they will start to gather differently. Like we were talking on the live stream yesterday morning about like we're working towards our next big milestone, and that was being together, like physically together. And I wonder if the festivals and whatnot, they'll come back at some point, like they have to. But because a lot of people's livelihood depend on them. But I do wonder if there will be sort of smaller gatherings too. Like we were talking about sort of this idea of getting together for like 2 or 3 days where you maybe have 1 or 2 people fly in, meeting with the local community that can get there via train or via, a quick hop and a jump, kind of an airfare or a ferry, or, like we were talking about gathering as a community in either London or Toronto, because those are kind of those two hubs, and then there's a couple of hubs in the States. So we were kind of like throwing out ideas. Like it's a lot easier for me to come on a Thursday and fly out on a Sunday or a Monday, and all of us gather as a community, versus these big festivals that happen once a year where you may or may not have time to see all your people. Because it is like they're crazy weekends.
I kind of feel like what you're talking about is similar to like those smaller retreats.
Yeah.
Like Grace would have her weekend retreats in Ireland, and like again,
Yeah.
like you said, like, you have like 80%, 90% of your attendees are returning people, like just the same
Oh
people
yeah,
who come back
definitely. It's the same people coming
because
back in
so-
again and again. And
and
it's
then you have
literally,
like a couple
yeah,
of people who come in from international and stuff, and so I
yeah,
think it's the same sort of thing that you're talking about,
Yeah.
Rachel. But I think probably more of those things will crop up, and it'll probably maybe not be as organized as Grace has it, where she's already pre-organized the hotel and everything, but it's like everyone sorts out their own like Airbnb, and you kind of like maybe book a restaurant or book a space in a certain place, and you kind of get together, and it's just a little bit more casual, a little bit less, somewhere in between a retreat and kind of like together with people down the pub kind of thing.
Because there's going to be people who are not going to be comfortable gathering in big groups for a long time. You know, there will be people, there will be the early adopters who like book a flight the day after, and then there will be kind of the bell curve of most people will be somewhere in the middle. But there's going to be people for health reasons that can't gather. You know, there's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to have to navigate for the next probably 3 to 5 years at least.
at least.
I also think that
Yeah.
being asked to, and for conscious reasons deciding to not gather and to stay home, is allowing us to focus on what we miss about being able to do that. And as you're talking about this, Rachel, I think about Saturday morning lives with you feels like a routine that's very easy for me to do. There's not a lot of shifting around to sit down and join some people online and still feel like I'm part of something.
Yeah.
And also thinking about having traveled with both Mina and Grace now. I've traveled with Grace when she was an exhibitor at a yarn festival, and you have full-on days of what I call peopling, and just
Oh my God.
around huge crowds. I've traveled with Mina when we've taught in person, you know, being in New York City at a huge hotel, teaching classes, Mina especially, literally all day. What I think about having traveled with them is going back to the cottage, going back to the hotel room, going back to the Airbnb, and it's 2, 3, 4 people, quieter, and it's calmer, and it's easier to interact and feel really comfortable in that smaller space scenario, especially when the event is huge, like a Rhinebeck.
Yeah.
Or a Vogue Knitting Live.
What I miss about traveling is the after party.
It's
That's
this.
the thing, like having done several of these larger events, like especially after the first one that I did was a Vogue, and I remember feeling so overwhelmed in that very first sort of big fiber festival I'd ever attended, and it was just like this really overwhelming feeling, but also incredible as well. And it was like great because I got to see a lot of friends and see a lot of people, but I came away like, and I'm not an introvert as such at all. Like I get a lot of energy from those sorts of big events. I get a lot of inspiration. I come away feeling really energized. Whereas I know a lot of people will come away and they're like, I just need to hermit for about a week just to regain my energy. Whereas I'm like, no, I'm ready to go. Like I'm all pumped up now, sort of thing.
I know this for a fact because I shared with Mina for the last Edinburgh, and oh my God, I am one of those hermiters.
Yeah,
and Mina was like, right, I've got everything planned. Okay, now we're going to take photos. And I'm like, yes, this is going to be great. This is fabulous. It's fab. But I think the one event that I absolutely was devastated to miss last year was actually Barcelona Knit.
Yeah.
So it's a smaller, newer festival, and I've made a point the last 2 years of going on my own and staying on my own in a little apartment in the middle of Barcelona, and just like, it's just bliss. Absolute bliss. You go out and you meet all the people and you do all the things, and then you come home and you're just like, I'm in Barcelona. And it's just, and I was so cross when it was cancelled and it wasn't going to work. So I actually rented a cottage, kind of similar to where we stayed, Marce. I rented a cottage in Limerick, like in country in Limerick, and I stayed there for a week, and it was the best thing I've ever done for myself. I just like that alone space in the middle of, not even alone, but like when there's only a small amount of people, or even just yourself, like just that space to be somewhere that's different, to experience something. It's part of the traveling bit, which I absolutely love, but You know, the festivals, then it's beautiful. Like on the plane, you'd always meet loads of people, you know, you'd always, plane. I can't wait for a plane, lads. Oh, anyway.
It was funny, but going back to the whole like big events thing, like knowing how overwhelming the actual days are when you're like, if you're teaching like me, or if you're actually just going to the marketplace or wandering around Rhinebeck and stuff, I've always made a point of like organizing to either see certain people who I know are going to be there, like pre-arranging. Like, so when we went to Edinburgh, I was like, Marce, we're going to breakfast this day, or like we're doing this, we're going for lunch. It was lunch, wasn't it? Yeah, like, we're going for lunch this day. Even if we're just walking to the Asda across the road and getting a sandwich, like we're going to just like do something, just the two of us for like 5 minutes or whatever. Like
It's perfect.
I mean, we ended up hanging out more than that as it happened that time anyway, but just like making a point of like blocking out little bits of time here and there to like hang out with certain friends. And like even when I teach in New York, I always travel in a day or two before, one because jet lag, and second of all, so I have a chance to actually see some friends before the whole thing starts. So I get to fly in a couple of days early. I get to catch up with my friends who live in New York for like dinner a couple of nights before the whole festival starts. That way I know I've seen my people, I've had a chance to talk to them. If I get to see them again, great. And if not, then at least I saw them that one time already. And if I didn't get to see them again before I have to leave, especially if it's the sort of thing where I'm teaching and my time isn't entirely my own, then, you know, I've ticked those things off my list of like things I would definitely want to spend time with, and anything else on top of that is a bonus sort of thing. So it's kind of like trying to balance the big and the small get together.
Yeah.
I think there's been a global reprioritizing. You just boil things down to what's really important to you, and hopefully you have the privilege and the opportunity to focus on that.
I think you're right. And I hope that we don't lose that, you know, post, you know, that as things open up and you know, people are vaccinated and all that kind of stuff, that we don't lose that.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope we don't.
I definitely know that I was
adjustment that the events
so
have to do.
Yeah, exactly, Marce. Yeah. Go ahead, Grace.
Oh, sorry. I remember the week of lockdown, I had a class to teach the week before up in Dublin. And I was still working, you know, in the hospital. And I was like, should I cancel this class? You remember that? Do you remember those first weeks of like, what should I do? Like, do I need, anyway? So I ended up going up and teaching the class. And like, I had something booked every single weekend until November 27th or something like that. Every single weekend I was booked out, either with online stuff, but mostly going places, doing stuff. And I also was supposed to have my wedding in September. And I have to say, when I cancelled my retreats, it was going to be my busiest retreat year. I was going to have 5. When I cancelled all of the retreats, I actually breathed the biggest sigh of relief. Not because,
That's
like,
real.
obviously I really wanted to do the retreats. There was loads of events that I really wanted to do, but there was an awful lot of stuff that I had committed to that I just did not want to, not that I just didn't want to do, I just realized that I just didn't have the capacity to do it.
Yeah.
And realizing that, understanding that I was completely oversubscribed with everything I was doing, was unsustainable. I needed to just focus on work, just do that, get through this. And I'm still on that.
Yeah.
Almost 10 months later, I'm still just trying to get through work. And
I remember talking to you just before the whole COVID thing happened, and like you saying like how stressed you were. And I remember saying to you, Grace, just say no. Just
tell them no.
No.
Yeah, and it's actually so difficult.
It's so easy to say.
So difficult for me, and it's so hard to flip that around and just be like, actually, now with COVID, I can't possibly. Wow, it's great to have an excuse sometimes, but like, it's made me really realize like, what is actually important. Okay, I really need to prioritize what is going to bring me joy, what is going to bring me around the people that I love, what is going to feel good, what is going to bring me farther on the journey where I want to be, and not just doing someone else a favor just because they asked. And it's all about that reprioritization. I think you're totally right, Rachel, in that whole, you know.
Yeah. We have been talking, my husband and I, ad nauseum. It's funny that we would segue to this because Fluff to Stuff, Zero to Hero, all this stuff, our communities that we all run our podcast, this is all part of it. My husband and I have been talking a lot lately about cultivating our long-term happiness, because happiness isn't something that you cultivate 5 minutes ago or in these 5 minutes. Right now, we're creating a sense of pleasure being together. It's why we say it's a pleasure to meet you. It's because you're acknowledging to that other person that it was a pleasure, that you brought me pleasure, right? And then taking that one step further, that's how we cultivate our long-term happiness. And that's how we find joy long-term, so that when you look back, you can say, hey, that was a really good year. Like in the face of a lot of adversity, we came through, and it was actually like, okay, like maybe not the COVID year for a lot of people, but you know what I mean? And projecting into the future, how do we cultivate and create long-term happiness and pleasure and whatnot? This is just totally that. Like, how do we do that? And how do we do it well? And how do we do it with grace and resilience and set our boundaries and manage our stress? And, I don't have the answers, but I think it starts with saying no. I think the more we say no, the more no matter how extroverted we are. Yeah.
We've also been given this opportunity to generally, as a globe, turn inward. What's happening in your house? What's happening in your life? What is happening with your chosen community and with your family? I think there's this general looking inward first. All four of us, the next step is like, what am I going to do outward? What things will I participate in externally now that I've looked at what's happening internally? Because you're right, there's no one solution for everybody, but I genuinely feel like most of us have just been forced to look at our circle first, then decide what happens after that and how much external we want to be part of.
Which can be quite painful, because for some of us, when you do sort of look inside or look inward to our homes, you sort of start to realize that, maybe things weren't kind of functioning as well as they could have, or maybe you were kind of close to that edge, a little bit more than you thought you were. Grace and I were chatting before we started about our environments that we work in the hospital, and you carry that with you. Like, that's, same for teachers, same for, any frontline workers, and then people who are at home and, doing home learning with their kids and finding that really stressful. That was one of the things they kept covering again and again in our local news, was that teachers are now homeschooling their kids, and they can't even they can't get their kids to do the home learning.
All is lost.
Yeah.
Teachers can't teach at home. That is crazy.
They can't teach their own.
I can imagine it though. It's totally a different scenario when
absolutely. My sister-in-law talked about it quite a bit, because her and her husband are both teachers, and she was like, oh yeah, like no way was Alice gonna listen to what we had to say, because we're mommy and daddy, not Mrs. Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Anderson, right?
Right.
So
very different.
So interesting.
I actually switched out of a very maker-centric business, because the year before 2020, I was traveling and teaching and podcasting and vlogging from festivals and doing a lot of yarn related things. And I wasn't working a regular paycheck gig. And I went the opposite way of many people. I went back to work, went back to a corporate job in 2020, and decided that all the fiber stuff was just going to be for me. And it was the total opposite balance of what I would have expected, having come off of a great year in 2019, where the fiber community was very giving and very nourishing to me. But in a chaotic scenario that I didn't expect, I was like, you know what? I need to punch a clock, and I need to just know where I'm supposed to be Monday to Friday. And then that's a thing I can control. And the fiber things will be my oasis. They will not be my full-time work. It was a complete flip for me. And I have respect for anybody who did the opposite of that and really dove in and started doing more with their fiber work as a way to make that work for their life. But for me, I wouldn't have thought that the year before, but it wasn't what I needed. I needed something that was way more structured.
It's all about control, isn't it?
Ultimately.
We're all resilient because we're here. But what is it that you have control over? What can you control, and what do you not have control over, and how are we going to let that stuff go?
Yeah, letting it go is something that I learned a lot this year, like letting, okay, I'm not going to end up to spinning all of my stash. I'm just going to let that go. It's fine.
Yeah.
You know what?
It's
There
okay.
are worse things in this world, and they're all in hospital. And I'm going to focus on that. And I'm only going to, like, at the moment, I have like really easy, satisfying, small projects. They're all like garter stitch or stockinette stitch in the round. I don't want anything complicated. It's all going to be fine. And it's just comfort. That's all I want. Just a bit of comfort.
Yeah, I think one big takeaway for me from this last year is control the things you can control and just try not to think about the rest because you can't do anything else about it, kind of thing. We've had certain things coming up in our personal life that can't really talk about right now, but eventually, hopefully. But it's like some aspects of it are within our control, and we can try to do, we do our best, and we can like focus on those things, and we can fix those things, or we can answer those questions. And there are other things that are coming up that are like what ifs, and like, oh, but if this, and we're waiting on someone else to do something, and like, but what if they do that instead, and then it ruins everything? Or what if they kick up a fuss about this thing? I'm like, well, I can't fix that right now. That person hasn't done the thing yet.
Yeah.
So why are we going to sit here and stress about it? Because all that's going to do is get me worked up and angry and frustrated and annoyed. And we will probably end up having a fight between me and my husband because we're stressed about something that we have no control over. I'm like, we can only do what we can do about the thing that we can do things about.
It's like who's on first, who's on second. Like it's like a
it's like I can only focus on this thing because this is the thing that I can do something about right now. That thing, I can't do anything until this other person makes a decision about what they're going to do. And if they decide one thing, then this whole thing falls through and we're back at square one. Or, if they decide something else, then maybe we can have a conversation with them and come to some agreement and move on from it or whatever. So it's like, but until that person has done that thing or made that decision, there's nothing for us to do at this point. Like we can't force them to say something or do something a certain way. So yeah, I mean,
but being in limbo is hard, right? Being in a holding pattern, it's hard.
Having lived in a holding pattern for about 5-6 years at one point. So when we moved to Dubai, towards the end of it, my husband was like, oh, I really want to do this MBA. And so then we were in a bit of a holding pattern while he was trying to figure out what that was going to be and where we were going to move. Then we moved to Bahrain. He was doing his MBA. We knew it was all temporary. So again, it felt like this weird holding pattern that we were in, that we didn't know where we were going to end up. And then I got pregnant, and he literally handed in his notice at his job about 2 weeks before we found out I was pregnant. So great timing. So he thought, oh, you know what? I'll get the focus on my MBA. I'll have some time off. We have money saved up. It'll be fine. And I'll have time to focus on my studies and figure out, find my perfect next job, and we could figure out where we're moving to next. So now I'm pregnant and we have a deadline because I can't fly after a certain period of time. So we have a hard date where we have to figure out what we're doing, where we're going. So then that became stressful, and it became this like, the last 3 months before we actually moved, we were toying between moving to New York, moving to Washington, moving back to London, moving back to Dubai, moving to, I think Hong Kong was on the table at one point. Like there were so many options at different points. So like, oh, following this avenue, and like he was getting involved with some different like startups as like, I'm like, where are we going? I'm like 6 months pregnant. What are we doing?
It's like the devil of choice. What's that saying about choice is the devil, or the devil you don't know, or yeah.
It's a constant state of not knowing. It's this constant state of not knowing what's coming next. And then it was like, we decided, okay, this is when we're moving to DC. We're moving to Washington, DC. That's what's happening. We even like got quotes from moving companies and like everything sorted and like getting to the last bit. And then Perry had to go to Hong Kong for a class. He came back and he was like, no, let's do New York. I'm like, what? What? Thankfully, like DC and New York would have been the same company. It just would have been what specific project he was going to be put on. And even though the New York project wasn't necessarily the ideal one that he wanted to be on, he wanted to be in New York more than he wanted to be in DC. So he was willing to do the job he didn't like as much to be in the place he wanted to be. Because he was like, look, this might only be for a year, which in the end it was. So he was like, let's go to the place we've always wanted to live in, sort of thing. So I'm glad we did do that in the end. But again, our whole year in New York was clouded by this thing of like, are we going to be here any longer than this, or are we not? And like 6 months in, we knew we weren't staying. So after that, I had the friends that I had, and this is another thing, like, but I stopped making an effort to try to make new friends at that point, because I was like, at this thing, I'm like, well, what's the point? We're not going to be here. Like, what's the point? And then we moved back to the UK, and we had another 6-7 months of like, are we staying? Are we going back to New York? What's happening? Like, again, limbo for another 6-7 months until we figured out, no, we're staying. And then we bought our house, we moved in, we finally settled down, and it was like, so this is what it feels like. Yeah, this is what it feels like to know what's going to come next. Like, you know, it was really weird because a few months ago we had to sit down and finally fill in the applications for my daughter's school. Like, she's starting school in September. We're like, oh, okay, like we know where we're going to be. And this is the other thing, it was so hard for us to plan our future because we never knew where we were going to be. Like, I couldn't plan things 6 months in advance because I didn't know if we were going to still be living in the country we were in at the time. Like, everything was such, like, it literally, there was like 5-6 years of our lives where we constantly felt like we didn't know what was happening next.
Yeah.
It was an amazing experience, don't get me wrong. Like, we had a great time living abroad, but it was a lot of like being in a state of flux and not knowing, and, you know, moving around every couple of years. And so, yeah, it is hard not knowing what's going to happen next, but having been through it for so many years, now it's just like, it's fine. It'll work out. It'll be okay.
I think that my mom always used to say that when I was growing up, like, if it hasn't worked out yet, it's not over. You have to wait.
I literally said the exact same thing to Perry once, and I was like, look, just because things didn't work out the way you wanted to right now doesn't mean it's not the right thing, doesn't mean it hasn't worked out the way it was supposed to. You know, like, everything happens I'm very much a believer of like things happening for a reason, and everything working out eventually the way it's supposed to. You might not, like you said, if you don't understand why something's happening right now, it just means it's not over yet. And like, every time something's happened that's been a disappointment, I look back on it a few years down the line and be like, oh, wow, like, if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be where we are now. Like, I didn't get, for example, like, I didn't get the grades I needed to get for my A-levels to go to my first choice university, and I ended up changing direction. I had a lot of trouble figuring out what I wanted to study at university, so I flip-flopped a lot of stuff. So I didn't end up going to study the thing that I'd applied to study for, and I did something else, and I met my husband. So, you know, like, if all of that hadn't happened, our paths probably never would have crossed, and we never would have met, and we'd probably be in completely different places by now. But, you know, it's all those sorts of things.
You wouldn't have a Layla, which would be
there
tragic.
wouldn't be a Layla.
That would be
And
tragic.
it's all these things that, like, you know, if I had gotten the grades and gone to the university that I'd chosen to go to and whatever, like, I wouldn't have the life I have right now. And I can't ever say that I regret that, because I love the life I have right now. And it's all those sorts of things. It's like, whenever you look back on your life, you'll see those things that used to feel like this massive disappointment. But then with history and with hindsight, you can be like, actually, that then led to these things happening, which were really good.
And maturity too, I think, you know.
Yeah.
The gift of years really helps. I have a similar story actually with my husband, because we stayed an extra night. My cousin and I were traveling, and we stayed an extra night in Munich, and we weren't supposed to. We were booked on the train and had a hostel booking at the other end in Frankfurt on our way to meet my best friend in Amsterdam the next day. And we had met up with some locals, and some were traveling and some were local, and we had met up with them, and they had talked us into staying one more day. And that's how my husband and I met. We wouldn't, if we had left, that we wouldn't have met. Yeah, so we skipped Frankfurt because it was just a layover for us on our way to Amsterdam. We ended up going all the way through to Amsterdam to meet up with my best friend. And I remember sitting in the Amsterdam, like in the train station, as we came in and we were waiting for Troy to come and grab us because we'd agreed to meet there just because he knew where we were. So I was like, we'll just stay where we are. And I remember, and my cousin was like, why are you being such a like, why are you being so negative? And why are you like, what's happened? And I was like, well, I just met my husband yesterday and I'll never see him again.
Did you really say that? That is so romantic.
No, for real. Yeah, for real.
It's the best.
Yeah, I was so bummed and so upset because I hadn't given him my email address. I didn't give him, like, he's from Toronto. Like, what were the chances? What were the chances?
Oh, I have goosebumps. That's the best.
He tracked me down through those people that we knew in Munich. He tracked me. My cousin had exchanged email addresses with one of the other people, and he ended up by fluke traveling with that person to the next city. They were all going to Prague, and he got Anne's email address from him and emailed me after we were home. So it was like another 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah.
So cute.
Get a random email. Do you remember me? Yes, we were getting married.
I'm free in April the 2nd.
Yeah, exactly. Catch up here. Catch up. We're already engaged. Like, you're so late.
Yeah.
Where's my ring?
Make sure you show up on time.
Yeah. Well, and it was funny because it wasn't just me. So like we were, like, that was September. We were, we met up in Toronto in December because my cousin happened to be from Toronto. And then we were engaged and he moved by June. Yeah. So yeah.
Pure true love.
When you know, you know. I always say.
It's funny, actually. James and I, we had a time limit on ours. So I was working in Exeter in the hospital there, and he was from Barnstaple. And we met like on OkCupid or something. It was like an online thing. And I had booked my flight to Australia. I had booked my flight to Australia a month before I texted. I don't know what was I doing on OkCupid a month before? Like, I knew that nothing was going anywhere. What was it? Just passing time? I don't know. So anyway, he texted me and we were talking and we were chatting and met up anyway about 10 days after we were chatting. And then afterwards I was like, oh crap. I had 5 months because I booked it like 6 months out. I had 5 months, and I said straight up, I was like, I'm leaving. I'm going to Australia for a year. And he was like, that's fine. I was like, okay, he was like, don't worry about it. We'll just, I enjoy spending time with you. You enjoy spending, it's fine. And like, I think I'd left. We like, things kind of fast tracked very quick. Like, we were going on little holiday breaks and like city breaks, and we were seeing each other like almost every week, like every weekend. And then I'd gone 10 days, I think. Yeah, I was gone 10 days, and I got a phone call going, so where are you going to be in a month? He quit his job and he flew out. Wow. And we got and I was like, is this a terrible idea? I'm such an overthinker. I'm a massive overthinker. I cannot trust myself. I do not trust myself with any decisions. So then I was like, well, he's coming now. Oh no, he's coming. And then we shared a camper van. He's very tall. He's 6'8". Shared a very small camper van for 4 months. And I was like, yeah, if we're still alive by the end of this, I think that's it now.
That's a good measure right there.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So I'm aware of the time because I feel like the four of us could just sit here all day and chat for like hours and hours and hours. So if people want to learn more about Fluff to Stuff, where do they need to go?
Well, I think the easiest thing is that we have a link tree, actually, and I'll make sure you have that link, Rachel, because the link tree will take you to all the places. We have an intro video that's out on YouTube, and we have a YouTube channel. So if people want to start right from the beginning, what is this all about? Mina did a great job of putting together an introductory video, and Grace and I talk about certain elements in there. So that's a good place to start.
Perfect. I'll link that in the post. Yeah.
And actually, if you follow the hashtag Fluff to Stuff 2021 on Instagram, you'll see that we have an Instagram account and you can follow there as well. And we have a Ravelry group. So really it's your choice.
Mhm.
Consume it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, you
I
guys.
think the
Thank you so
team
much
here
for
has
being here.
done the team has done a good job making sure you can find us.
Yeah, I'll make sure that everything's linked in the Patreon post. And if I miss anything, just let me know and I'll pop those links in. And I'll link each of the podcasts too, so that people can find each of you if they don't know who you are. Yeah.
Ah,
Thanks, you guys.
thanks
Thank you
so
for
much,
taking the time.
Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. I hope
Yeah,
to
we
talk to you guys
appreciate
again
you.
soon.
Mhm.
Thanks, Marce.
Bye.
Bye, guys. We'll talk soon.